If you didn't hear, good old Snowden came out and he had some pretty hot things to say about OpenAI. Specifically, he said, like you've all been warned. And I don't think this kind of clickbaity, stuff is helpful. But he's got some good reasons for some of the concerns he has. So I don't want to completely dismiss it. But what, Snowden really came out and talked about was the fact that US Army General Paul Nakasone, I think Nakasone. Anyway, he was the former NSA director. He was the longest serving leader in the US Cyber Command. He was the chief of Central Security Service, something like that. He's now a board member on OpenAI. And so I think what we're seeing here is Snowden's kind of shots fired, calling out, going, the former NSA is now getting involved in OpenAI. Be very careful. His warning was, basically using any of their products, do it at your own risk. You're basically giving the government everything that you have and giving them full access to this stuff. Now, my response to this was, I understand his concerns, and also he's been much closer to it than I have. I've never worked for the NSA or any of these top government agencies. So he's probably seen plenty of things that most people have never seen. And if we had seen him, we might be rightfully skeptical of NSA suddenly, but it's not NSA, it's a former NSA. But and I think this is where some of the conspiratorial stuff doesn't always go well for us, because we're like, well, former NSA is now getting involved in this, so I'm sure that means this, and I'm sure that means this. And pretty soon you can go down this rabbit trail. It's like, is there actually any evidence that that is actually what all going on here? And now at the same time, should we maybe be a little more aware of the fact that, I'm not surprised that former government folks are getting involved with some of these large language models. If you've listened to my stuff for any length of time, you know that I talk regularly about the power of these things. And I'm actually, quite frankly, shocked how much of this stuff is open source. And, it's like, you hear news articles where people walk into the building and take snapshots of the development stuff. And I mean, security protocols are not super strong. And I mean, there was just one a couple weeks ago. There was a total hijack of 4 GPT-4, and somebody made a completely unlocked version of it. They got shut down pretty quick. So it doesn't surprise me, with the need for regulation, for more governance, for things like that, and then the tremendous power that these technological capabilities have. Should we really be surprised that the government wouldn't be going, hey, we might want to get involved here and have a little more to say on this and be more involved, because these privately held companies are kind of running rogue, doing whatever the heck they want. They're not necessarily doing it. Now, I personally am not necessarily a big fan of, let's have the government come in and swoop in and try and do a bunch of stuff. But I don't think that's necessarily what we're seeing here. I see this as OpenAI is seeing the writing on the wall, going, the government is going to get more involved in this stuff. The military is going to get more involved in this stuff. The regulators are going to get more involved in this stuff. We as a company would be wise to have people who are experienced and capable and know how these systems and institutions work on our advisory boards, so that they can advise us appropriately. If you're not as familiar with the corporate sector, that's exactly how advisory boards are designed to work. You're supposed to hire thinkers and minds of people who come from potentially competitive landscapes, from potential barriers to what you're trying to do. You're supposed to bring them in to go, here's what we're trying to do. What are we not thinking about? What barriers might we encounter? What are the things that might come around the corner that we're not seeing right now, so that they can advise as a board of directors to the organization, well, you know what, this would be a stupid decision to make. No, I wouldn't do it quite this way. So to automatically assume that just because, this Army general who is former NSA is part of the advisory board, this necessarily means that the NSA is now getting everything that OpenAI does. And so just throw OpenAI's products out with the, to me, that's just a far reach. And I think we far overestimate um, how some of these things work. I mean, having worked in the C suite and working with a lot of companies and their C suites, I can tell you most senior leaders who are involved with stuff, they don't have some sort of like magic knowledge, or there's not some, dark boardroom where nefarious conversations are it's they're normal people doing normal things that happen to have an expertise in a certain area. And so my lens on this is, okay, dude with a ton of experience in an area that is highly likely to intersect with what OpenAI is doing, especially with as advanced as they're getting and mature and as widespread as they're getting. Of course, they're going to want someone like that on their board helping advise them. Now, at the same time, lest everybody think I'm just saying, oh, nothing to see here. Don't worry about it. Pay no attention to it. I mean, Snowden's got some reasons and he's leaked some stuff that I, regardless of how you feel about it, like, hey, the public sometimes isn't always told the truth about everything. And when it comes out, people go, really? Like this was all happening under our nose. So do I think he has some good reason to be skeptical? You bet. You bet. And should we maybe be watching how the government gets involved, how these institute? Yes. If you've listened to any of my stuff, I tell people all the time, be paying attention. Don't just blindly assume, oh, nothing to see here. I'm sure it's fine. I'm sure everything they're doing is for our good. No, of course it's not. They've got their own agenda, things they're trying to do. OpenAI has their things they're trying to do. They're trying to make as much money as humanly possible. You think that there's not the possibility that they might make some really bad decisions that are not in your best interest as a result of that? Well, of course they are. So, yeah, be mindful. We be watching this? I absolutely, and I absolutely will be watching and continue to be waiting to see how the government, how the military starts to get involved in some of this stuff. It's going to be interesting, especially as they start to look about productizing this with government agencies. I can tell you right now, if the US government is considering getting in bed with OpenAI for use in military type stuff, yeah, you better believe they're going to want to know, hey, is this data secure? Like, who has access to it? How do we make sure it doesn't go so far? Maybe all of this stuff doesn't need to be open source that our enemies can necessarily just, you better believe some of that stuff's going to happen. And as OpenAI is a capitalistic company, and they're looking at how do we make as much money as humanly possible with this technology we've spent trillions of dollars investing in, and they're now productizing it. Of course, they're going to be starting to look for different suitors, and government and military is no different. So when we really break it down to some of this stuff, I think there's plenty to be cautious and mindful of. And yes, should you be careful about how much information you're sharing with an open, AI product? Yes, but you should be just as careful with any sort of technological product. The number of times I talk to my kids about the fact, like, just remember, anything you do on the internet could be found, could be discovered, could show up somewhere you don't want it to. Now, I'm not saying so it's our responsibility and they have no responsibility to be careful. No, that's not what I'm saying. Yes, we should be pushing for security, data privacy, absolutely. But to us as the end users, I think, yeah, we should be very careful about what information is shared. That's why it concerns me so much, the idea of these AI companions or these AI things that we just basically tell everything and use to basically live and run our lives for us. You think that's smart in general? Like, no, of course not. And I see how we've treated mobile phones where we just assume, well, it's my phone, so I can do whatever I want on it and it'll never hurt me. Like, what? Same with social media. I can post whatever I want on social media. That's never going to come back. Are you kidding? Like, you're putting it out there. So be mindful, but you don't necessarily need to be more mindful now because a former NSA director is at OpenAI. That should be the kind of vigilance that you're executing and that you're using all the time around technology, not out of fear, not out of concern for all these terrible things that could happen, but just out of wisdom and discernment on, hey, is this the kind of stuff that I necessarily want potentially publicly accessible, publicly available to people who don't really know me, or it could be used for things that I wouldn't necessarily want it to. Yeah. So use discernment. I don't think it's helpful for people freaking out about an NSA director being on OpenAI's boards just based on how boards work, the purpose of them, and where OpenAI is going.